Welcome to Reroute Reflections, where we share our thoughts and insights about relationships, wellness, and business. We're your hosts, Becca and Andrew. We've been married for 10 years and have plenty of knowledge and experience in our relationship, the wellness industry, and the business world. Grab a coffee and let's chat.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Episode number 15.
And it will be our final episode of our season 1.
Of season 1, yes.
Yes, so the plan is to take a couple months off for summer and then come back in the fall with some fresh ideas, ready to go again.
Yeah. If you think of anything, for those who've been following along this incredibly fun journey, for us anyway, and I've been really enjoying it. If you have any suggestions for us, please let us know what you would like to see in season 2. We've been dabbling with the idea of maybe going video for season 2 so that we can get some content out on some other platforms, like YouTube and TikTok.
Yeah, and just like more content in general that way too.
Yeah, and then at least we can feel the need to dress up for these things.
Yeah, I know, because we're I mean,
let's be real. I need a shower. That's what I need right now. Yeah. We just had our first training session with Luna, our official, really new trainer, and it went really well. So we're recording on Sunday as per usual, and we had our first. So we're doing 10 sessions every week, every Saturday,
every few weeks, depending on the schedule.
It's supposed to be every week,
okay,
but they're off next week. So every week so hopefully by the end of summer we're gonna have a brand new, well-trained dog that
actually listens to us.
Yeah, no, it's been good so far. We just had a little training session with Luna outside, so we're a little stinky. It's been hot over here in Toronto this last week. There's been a huge heat wave. Yeah, it's been pretty terrible.
Last week, you might have noticed that we did not drop a new episode because the two of us were really sick.
Yeah, really sick. Yeah.
You were sick Wednesday to Saturday, and then I caught it right after from Sunday. I was off work until I went back on Wednesday. So took us out for a few days, and we just could not muster up the energy to get a podcast done over the weekend while we were both in a really bad place. Yeah,
it was COVID. That's what we got.
What you think, yeah.
I tested.
I know, but the test was expired 3 years ago.
That's the thing, but I was talking to some people, and it's like a pregnancy test, where it's you got false positives, or false negatives, but you don't usually get false positives.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Even if it's expired, huh?
Yeah. Okay. It's more likely to get a false positive, but you'll hardly get a. Now I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I felt like COVID. I've had it before.
Yeah, muscle aches, stuffy, just.
Yeah, hot sweats, cold sweats.
Yeah.
I'm still wearing the nasal
the nose
strips or whatever they call them.
The Breathe Right.
The Breathe Right strips. Not the Breathe Right strips, the cheapo ones.
Yeah.
They're terrible, so they might not even last this full episode. We'll see what happens. But that's what happened last week. Anything else pop up that for you?
I don't think so. I only worked Wednesday to Friday, which is nice, but I don't think I'm back to 100% yet. My throat's still a little bit sore.
Yeah.
A little bit stuffy still. I think I needed just a really short week as well and some good rest this weekend. Some of our plans had fallen through, which I think for both of us was a little good of a good thing, so we could actually get some extra rest since last weekend was nothing. Just us being sick. So
yeah, honestly. Let's dive into this week's episode topic, which sometimes you struggle with trying to figure out what to talk about, and then sometimes the news kind of brings it front and center. So I'm not sure how many people have seen it or heard about it, but I think it was last week. It might have been the week before, but I think it was this current week. The Surgeon General in the US came out with some pretty firm direction around social media and the risks. He had written an op-ed piece in New York Times just stating the risks with children using social media, and are calling for warning labels to be added to the apps, so all social media apps associated with the significant mental health harms that it causes adolescents, which it's interesting because it's something that we all knew was a problem.
I think people have been talking about this for quite a few years now, just the harms of social media, what to do about it. But this article was really interesting because he actually gave some actual actionable steps on what to do next kind of thing.
And brought some attention to some stats that I think we all kind of knew. We were teetering on the stories that have come out around social media and the harm it causes, especially for adolescents, is ridiculous. And for us, we're 34, 35 now. So we were just entering the stage of like social media when we were in university.
Right.
Social media never really, when social media wasn't a thing really in high school for us. I think we had MSN chat, which was like an IM messaging service online.
MySpace.
I wasn't even on MySpace.
You didn't even have MySpace?
I didn't even know what MySpace was, honestly. But I was like, that was basically it. For me, it was like IMing friends on MSN. And Facebook was the first thing that popped up that was like social media and got attention, but that was in university. And we were much older at the time. And even for us, having not been like impressionable teenagers in the 13 to 16-year-old range, I think, it still had a lot of negative effects on us growing as we were maturing and becoming adults. So I can't imagine what a child would have to endure, plus the bullying, the harassment, the blackmail. There were some stories that they had shared, and as we were doing some research on this for the podcast, it was alarming around how kids can be suckered into some really shitty situations. And basically Surgeon General is kind of coming up with the same type of warning that he gave, not he, but past Surgeon General gave around tobacco smoking. It's the same kind of deal in the same light.
And I think even just to consider even us as adults, the way we feel about social media, I think plenty of us have seen people online or have done it ourselves where we've needed like a break from social media to just get away from Instagram and TikTok and all those things for a little bit. Or maybe we set limits for ourselves as it is because we can just see how much it sucks you in and how it can cause you to compare yourself to others, or you can just get so much misinformation online as well. So to think that the impacts it's having on children and teens, like they don't fully have like the cognitive ability yet to be able to understand like how to use it in a more safe way, like
in a more balanced way too, because I think one of the other issues is relying so much on the screen and having those people connections happening exclusively online rather than in person. You fail to stretch those muscles. How do you interact with somebody face to face, developing those social skills that you can't really do online solely? I can't imagine that COVID's helped us in doing that, having those years being forced to be isolated, and then on top of it, having this channel like social media that allows you to do that almost exclusively. Good on him for, I think, coming out with this statement. He also shared a few stats that I thought were pretty alarming.
And you found this article on New York Times.
Yeah, the New York Times.
If anyone wants to read it, but I think
we'll link it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, but I think we'll pull out a couple of stats to share so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. Essentially, they came out to say that those who are at risk are adolescents who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media, saying that those who do face double the risk of anxiety and depression symptoms, rather. And the average daily use in this age group as of the summer of 2023 was 4.8 hours, so almost 2 hours longer than that threshold amount. Additionally, nearly half of adolescents say social media makes them feel worse about their bodies. So obviously that is a big problem for sure. And interestingly enough, I think a lot of people will say, what this warning, what good is it going to do? Is it really going to stop anything? And to be honest, like, it did build awareness for tobacco use back in the day. Tobacco use came from a place of everyone did it. It was like the sexy in thing to do. If you didn't do it, you were weird. And so to a place where it is now, which I believe it's been like, I think 60 years since that warning came out. So it's been a long time, but over time, it's gotten to a place now where if anyone's smoking, people looking at them like, ooh, like, that's gross.
Well, and I think like the warning on the actual package has only been out for like maybe a decade.
Maybe.
I don't know for sure.
I don't know.
Like, I think the actual warning on it, people had said the same thing at first. Oh, how much is it really going to deter people from smoking? To have a picture of smoker's lungs on the package, or to have the warning to say on there that this product increases your risk of lung cancer. But I do think it actually has had an impact on people. So I think a similar situation applies here, where we could say, oh, how much is a warning for social media really going to stop people, because we're all addicted to it at this point. But at the same time, there's no harm in trying it and seeing if it can help, right?
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. And in the article, it did quote that they went out with a survey to say if they did come out with a warning on social media, would this actually instill some action within parents? And 76% of people said that they would. Mm-hmm. So that was really interesting to say, like, it does. It's a warning from the top surgeon in all of the US, right? So you can't not pay attention to something like that. It's important. And I think it's really interesting. I think it'd be cool to start talking about like how we think this will go down, mm-hmm. and what are some of the benefits and risks of social media, and then maybe talk about what we think would be the right solution overall for social media in North America and around the world, to be honest. And let's see where we go from there. So I think one of the things the article had talked about were really interesting things, and I think they would really help. Like, one of the recommendations was that the companies that create social media or have a social media platform would be required to share all relevant data on health effects with independent scientists and the public, which currently they're not doing. So just building this idea of transparency, this independent safety audit, if you will provide some visibility into the overall effects to help scientists and the public understand more deeply what the effects are. Because I think right now it's a little hidden from the public how detrimental social media can be. And so opening up those floodgates will hopefully provide us a little bit more clarity around what the root cause of these issues might be. And it may be social media, but it may not be. It may be other factors that we're just not aware of. And so I think opening it up I'm surprised that they weren't doing this, to be honest.
Yeah, I think another thing they talked about in the article that I find interesting, that I think we've had discussions around before too, even with your family, is in schools having, classroom learning time or social time being phone-free experiences, and even as parents trying to create those phone-free zones around bedtime or meals or like social gatherings to really try and safeguard like their kids' sleep or real-life connections, because all of this can really have effects on their mental health. And perhaps even waiting until like after middle school to start allowing kids access to social media, because like you said in the beginning, we were the generation who didn't really get introduced to social media until maybe the end of high school, like more likely universities who were much older. But nowadays we hear about kids not only getting phones when they're sometimes like toddlers to play games and stuff on, but then having access to social media so early nowadays. What kind of barriers or things can we put in place to safeguard that time for them while they're still learning? They need to have those in-person social skills.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I had read last week, and I can't remember where it was. Now, don't quote me, but I know it was in the US. It may have been in LA or California somewhere. But there is a school district that has now banned phones in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And it'll be really interesting to see from them how things go as a result of that. Because I think what's always difficult is that you never really, unless you understand the true cause of a problem, introducing restrictions, limitations, it may have an adverse effect that you just weren't considering, right? Mm. Maybe social media isn't the issue here, it's something else. We just don't have enough data. And so going with this all or nothing approach could be detrimental because we just haven't identified the root cause of the problem. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. Good on the school board. Again, we'll put all that in the show notes. So apologies if I got the area incorrect. I think it's good on them for trying when testing it out and see what's happening.
And I also think with this phone social media thing with kids nowadays, it's almost like logical when we think about it to see how the connection could be between social media and the detrimental impacts on kids' mental health. Like, I think it's something that's relatively common sense when we think about it. I think that's why people are more likely to just jump into an all or nothing solution and to just ban it altogether. But I think in order to really make sure we're doing the right thing, that data collection and the research on it is necessary still. Because times are just so different. So, that's the hard thing with human behavior and overall health is it's very hard to just identify one specific factor that will impact one specific outcome. But the more research we can get on it, the better we can make decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to approach this like any complex problem involving people with an experimental test and learn attitude. Don't be emotionally drawn to any one outcome or solution. Let the data and the feedback influence what you do next versus this ideology that you're sticking to around, like, maybe you think deep down like it is social media that's a problem, but be open-minded to like it might not just be that. But I like what you said around the all or nothing, or it may have been what I said, I can't remember. I think that is the important piece, right? Because if you think about the ability to execute on this change, it's really difficult to be able to do it if you don't have everyone on board. Yes. Like, you think about, let's say Timmy's parents are like really gung-ho and they say, okay, I agree with what the Surgeon General is saying, I want to ban social media for my kids. But now Timmy's going to school and none of the other parents feel the same way. Now Timmy's a loser because no one
from his friends because
he's not on social media, and now he has other issues. So this idea of an all or nothing play, I think is going to be what makes or breaks this.
Right.
Which is why I do think that what the supposedly LA, or whatever the school board is doing is the right thing, because it's forcing an all or nothing. It's forcing everybody to not do something so that they can get a sense of whether this has helped or hindered the mental illness.
Yeah.
But mental illness is just one of the risks associated. There are a ton of others.
Yeah, for sure. So mental health risks, obviously, I think is pretty clear to everyone. Just the use of excessive social media and increased anxiety or depression. I think a lot of us are becoming more aware that these sort of mental health issues are at an all-time high, like higher than they've ever been before. And personally, I think a lot of this has to do with COVID as well, and being isolated and relying on social media use could have increased our anxiety about things. And kids and adolescents are specifically very vulnerable to these kind of effects as they're developing their brain still, developing their emotional maturity. So those are some risks to consider. But I think another big issue that comes up with the use of social media is just around body image with kids or with adolescents growing up. In the article, it was reported that nearly half of adolescents reported feeling worse about their bodies due to their use of social media. And I think we've all seen it as well, just that social comparison online, the unrealistic beauty standards that are shown on social media. I think even just personally working as a dietitian, I see it all the time, even with adults who are saying, I was looking at this thing online, there's this new diet for IBD, and I was wondering if that's something that I should try. But that also just plays into all the misinformation that's out there. And I know a lot of times people on social media are coming from a good place. They're trying to share what's worked for them, but they're not sharing information that's evidence-based and proven to work for most people. And it just makes things really confusing. And if I were to think about, adolescents coming across that kind of information, it's even more confusing for them because they're growing up, they're already a little insecure about their body. And if they see someone who they aspire to be like following this fad diet, they're going to be more likely to try it. And that just puts them at risk of mental health issues, potential eating disorders, like all these things. Yeah, there's a lot to consider around social media use or excessive social media use, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, I think there's also just been an overall gap in terms of like technology and innovation. And there's been just so much that has happened over the last 10, 20 years to a point where it's almost like lawmakers, policymakers, and even society as a whole has just not been able to keep up.
Right.
And find ways to restrict or limit and really understand the impacts. If we think about cigarette smoke, the dangers of driving, and the dangers of like even cannabis. If we think about cannabis, I think is a great example because it's only recently become legalized in some states and in Canada and other areas abroad. And so we still don't know the effects that cannabis it can have on people, whether it be developmental when you're younger or when you're older, what kind of impacts that might have. We just don't know because it just hasn't been studied. Now that it's been legalized, we now have the opportunity to study the effects a little bit better. Mm-hmm. Because back in the day when it was illegal, nobody's going to raise their hand and be like, yeah, I'm using an illegal substance. Like, let me participate in this study. I think now we've gotten the chance to be able to study these things and understand them. But it's going to take years for us to understand the impacts because this type of stuff takes time to manifest itself internally. And I think when it comes to things like social media, it's still so brand new. And because of the limitations of the data that we're not getting from the companies, that affects our ability to understand what is social media doing. Is it a positive for us or is it a negative? And is it always a positive? Or in certain situations, like in adolescence, it can actually be an actual detriment to their development. And so I think from a corporate responsibility standpoint, I find it ridiculous that social media companies have not been forthcoming about their data. Like, I understand from a business standpoint why they wouldn't want to do it, but right. At the end of the day, if you develop a product, any product, you need it to maintain your ethical standard. You need to make sure that the well-being of the people that are using your product are not affected.
Especially when there is some risk to it. Especially, I think we've come to learn with social media. Maybe at first nobody really understood that there was any risk at all to using it. But I think over the last decade or so, we've all started waking up to the fact that social media could have a negative risk to it. And so I think once companies learn that they're putting people at risk by using their product, I think that's when, like you're saying, they need to take more accountability to ensure that their product is safe and that they're trying to minimize those risks as much as possible.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to come to an all or nothing kind of ban, because that's definitely not good for business.
To be honest, I'm not going to lie to you. I think that's where it needs to go. I think at this stage, going back to the comment around if it's not all or nothing, it's going to make it really difficult to execute on this ban, because you have the risk of one parent being more lenient than another, and then that causing further negative experiences for the child that feels left out. I think the risks associated with social media, based on the information that we have available right now, is enough to say, especially to a point where the Surgeon General is coming out with a warning. We have age limits on cigarettes. We have age limits on driving. We have age limits on alcohol. All of those effects, why do we have those limits? We have the limits because they kill people, when it's being abused. So you abuse alcohol, you can die from that. You don't understand or don't have the cognitive ability to be able to drive a car when you're younger. So we don't have 12-year-olds driving cars. It's the same thing with, smoking. It's a detrimental effect. Like I said, the same warning label, the same warning came out from the Surgeon General back in the 60s about tobacco. Now we're getting the same thing happening about social media for adolescents. Why not ban it like they did with cigarettes, right?
Well, and I think another interesting thing that came up in the article similar to this was even just about things like food recalls. Recently, there was an outbreak of listeria, and it ended up killing 2 people. And because of that, there was a huge recall on, was it chicken? Salad.
Dairy.
Oh, dairy. It was on dairy products. So they did a major recall on all that specific brand of dairy products because 2 people died.
Yeah.
And yet, when we think about how many children or adolescents have we lost to suicide or mental health effects because of social media, and yet there's no action taken. We're just letting it happen still.
Yeah.
And I think the same can be said when we think about recalls for like cars or with airplanes, when we had that airplane, the
Boeing 737, yeah.
Yeah, where the plug came open and the door got ripped off, and they grounded every Boeing 737 to reassess the safety of each one, even though it only happened to one of them.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really shocking point to think about. Like we do have situations where we start seeing these detrimental impacts to people.
Mm-hmm.
And it only takes a few cases before we need to be like, listen, this has to stop right now. Let's recall and stop everything, reassess it for safety, take a look at what we can do moving forward, and then find a way to reintroduce it.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it's shocking, but it's not at the same time, because it has to do with mental health versus physical health. And there's an issue it's been happening for decades and generations around this idea that if it's a mental health issue, it's not as important as a physical health one. And I think based on what happens here around the warning of social media, we'll really truly understand the difference between how people perceive physical health issues versus mental. At the end of the day, all of the information that we have should see a ban in social media use for adolescents or those under the age of, 16, 14 at least.
Yeah.
But if that doesn't happen, then it just goes to prove, in my view, that people don't see mental health risk as big of an issue as physical health.
Yeah, they don't
because
take it as serious.
If social media caused a physical health issue directly, then I feel like there would be hell to pay.
There would have been some kind of action taken already, yeah.
But the fact that social media has been proven to show increases in depression and anxiety, which then is linked to suicide, people don't care about enough to be able to put the bans on. And I think the article says we owe it to children to protect them against products that have been released that are not safe. Just like the dairy products, just like the Boeing product. These are products that were deemed unsafe, caused death, and as a result have been banned. But we're not seeing that in social media.
And I think what's interesting about social media too, just thinking about the mental health versus physical health, I think there are a lot of physical health risks that are happening with social media, but they're almost invisible because they're happening behind the screen, right? For people, they're happening on an individual level. Nobody's broadcasting it on social media, the bad effects they've had from a fad diet or something, but it is happening because even I see it a lot of the time when I'm speaking to patients. There's instances where, let's say somebody has diabetes and they're like, oh, I'm eating a really healthy diet at home and now I'm in hospital for some other reason, but they're like, I don't eat any fruit, I don't eat any bread, I don't eat this and that. And I'm like, you're cutting out all carbohydrates just because you've probably been told. Well, and they've confirmed that they've been told online that carbohydrates are not good for diabetes. You have to cut out everything. And nobody has given them the proper education to say there's a difference between eating refined, really high sugar carbohydrates like cake and cookies every day versus having a serving of fruit at night for your dessert. There's a big difference between that and your ability to regulate your insulin and your glucose levels. But I think that's a very invisible physical health impact that people don't see because it's now impacting their quality of life. A lot of the time, I don't see them managing their blood sugars very well because they're not getting any source of carbohydrates, and yet they're on all sorts of insulin or medications, but they're not finding a way to actually balance everything properly. So I think there are physical health impacts behind the scenes that we're just not aware of. And I think that's why getting that research and really trying to understand more about what is happening with social media use can help us reinforce even more how detrimental it can be.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you. I think the issue is we've gotten to a place now where it may be too risky to keep, social media available for youth, for adolescents, while we figure all this stuff out.
Yeah.
I think there's enough science, or there's enough data and enough stories that are out there that should warrant us to take a step back and, at least from a temporary standpoint, issue that ban. And you know me, if you've listened to these podcasts, my approach is always in a balanced solution. That's always the way I approach it. But I'm not really dealing with life and death in the context of managing change for corporations. And I do have the benefit of being able to approach things with a balanced rather than a firm, restrictive hand.
Yes.
But I think in this case, just given the potential risk and the fact that we're dealing with lives here, and I don't think we're in that position where I do think more data is required. But we're in this kind of middle ground of, do we use these kids as guinea pigs for the next 5-10 years to see what the data tells us to then make a decision, how many kids are we going to lose as a result of that? And that's where I struggle.
And I think that's why we see like food recalls or car recalls or things like that, because it is a life and death situation for those instances where, and I think in the article, the Surgeon General had focused about that too during his medical school education, is like, when you're working in healthcare, like you don't have the luxury of being able to collect all the available evidence and all the data. Sometimes you need to make a split-second decision in the moment to save a patient's life. And I think when we're thinking about things like this, maybe it doesn't seem as urgent that we're like, oh, we need to ban social media right away to save someone's life, because realistically, maybe it's the 1% who are at risk of actually having harm done to them. But are we really, like you said, willing to risk that 1% just because we're like 99% are going to be fine? The same could be said for the food recall.
I was just going to say the same
1% thing. 1% died, but the other 99% are probably okay.
Yeah.
But we don't take that risk with it. We're going to say, let's recall everything, reassess everything.
Yeah.
Because this
before we give this product out to people.
Exactly.
Right? And it's wild that we don't feel the same way about things that affect mental health, when we all know that mental health issues are directly linked to physical health issues, whether that be through suicide or other physical manifestations of what that mental health trauma is. So it's tough. It is a perception thing that we as a society need to work on. But I think hopefully now that we're dealing with a subject matter that's so precious as children, that hopefully, lawmakers, policymakers, and those in power to make change are actually listening to this podcast, first of all. And second of all, actually going to maybe go ahead and maybe go forward with maybe the non-popular opinion here for the sake of protecting our kids' well-being. And honestly, I don't know what the solution is. I think it is one of those kind of like bipartisan issues where there's a lot of pros, at least in my head, around restricting or putting an age restriction on social media, just like we see, like I said, with cars, alcohol, smoking.
Yeah.
I see that as what we need to do, just based off of the information that we have available and the countless victims to social media trauma that has happened over the years. I think we're at that point where we need to consider that strongly. But I'm curious to hear what you guys all think, because there is no one right answer. And I would be very curious to hear, should we treat social media like other age-restricted activities like smoking, driving, alcohol? Is it worth sacrificing some of these freedoms to protect our children's mental health? And it's not an easy decision, right?
Yeah, and I think especially with something like social media, there's so much like nuance to it. There's so many different opinions that can come out that maybe we haven't even thought about. So we would love to hear your opinions too, to get a better idea of like how we're all feeling about this. Maybe people have stories that they could share about their own measures of limiting social media or what kind of results they're seeing, just to help like illustrate either the potential benefits or risks of implementing a ban on it. Yeah. And I think similar to you, and I also think about the Surgeon General saying, even in my work, there's instances where I need to make a yes or no decision for a patient because it has to do with their health outcome. So, for example, if I have a patient who comes in with a second or third bowel obstruction and they don't want to go the surgical route, they're asking for diet and nutrition information to help minimize their risk of bowel obstruction. Well, unfortunately, what the evidence says is to usually follow a more low fiber diet. And I've had patients who are already eating very healthy. They're eating lots of fiber. They're thriving except for these bowel obstructions. And it could be so easy for me to say, well, it's very individual. Like, why don't you just try like a whole grain bread that doesn't have all the grains and the nuts on it? Like, it looks plain. And I'm like, you know what though? I'd rather not take that risk with this patient. I think the best evidence I can say to them is a hard no. You need to be eating white bread for a little while, at least for a few weeks, to help your obstruction clear, and then maybe slowly reintroduce it. And I think similar with this topic, I think my immediate reaction would be to say, yes, we need to ban social media for children under 14, let's say, because we just don't know, and I would rather not take that risk of letting things continue the way they are and potentially get worse. Yeah.
Matt, I agree. Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be, you don't need to have all the information in order to make a decision to avoid something. You just need to have enough information in order to make the decision that, hey, listen, I don't want to take this risk if it turns out to be correct. And so at the end of the day, we have to figure out whether we're at that point now where, because I mean, this happens in business all the time too. There are risks with operating a business. There's some risks that the business will accept. There's some that the business won't accept. And they're just risks. That means they're potential things that are uncertain to happen, right?
Not guaranteed.
But you don't know if it's going to happen or not. But you need to determine whether you are going to continue on doing what you're doing despite the risks that it presents, or are you going to stop it and prevent a risk that may or may not have ever happened. And it's the same thing with this topic where it's, do we ban it? Let's say 16. Let's just cut it there. Ban social media up until the age of 16 for the potential risk of what it may do to kids if we don't. And we may be right, we may be wrong. But at the end of the day, do we have enough information to say one way or another today that we just don't want to accept that risk? And understanding that just putting on a warning label is not going to get what you need in a short period of time. It's going to take years. It's like you said, they came out with this warning on cigarettes 60 years ago in the 60s. So 60s, 70s. And it took 10 years for labels. It maybe took 2 years now for them to finally get rid of the fancy cartons that cigarettes come in. Now they're all bland. They're all
like brown and just bland.
In Canada anyway. I know the US doesn't. This is just happening now. Do we want to wait that long to get enough data to make one way or another? And again, like I've said countless times, we're, risk children's lives as a result of it. I don't know if we want to take that risk. But I want to hear from you all. What do you guys think? So feel free to reach out to us and share your thoughts. I'd love to have a conversation around something like this. This was a really interesting episode. I think one of different types of episodes that we've done where we're looking at like news articles. I actually liked it and sharing our opinions based on our experience in the business and health world. But yeah, we'd love to hear about what you guys think. If you have any questions or comments, you know where to find us on social media. Social media. Yeah, we're still using it. We're over the age of 16.
Within limits.
You can find us at Reroute Reflections, or you can email us at podcast@reroutereflections.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe and share this podcast with a friend. Know that this is our finale episode of season 1. We've had an incredible run, 15 episodes. Can't believe we did it.
Yeah.
Sticking to basically a weekly schedule on most accounts.
We only missed 2.
Only missed 2 out of 15. So I think we're pretty good. If you have any thoughts around season 2, what you would like to see in terms of topics, whether you like to see like guest speakers, how you think about the whole like introducing video, we'd love to hear from you.
And I think taking this break over the summer will give us a chance to be on social media more often with you guys, to actually get your input through Instagram stories or whatever. So keep an eye out for that. And
yes, we'll definitely be more active.
We'll talk to you there still.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll still be around. So
yeah, we'll definitely up that game now that we've got some time to be able to do that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this next chapter. And thank you all for listening, being part of this journey with us. We can't thank you enough. And remember, don't be afraid to reroute.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.